done doing it before with the 2 weeks in Mid-South Wrestling. I thought that we would go back and, because a lot of people have been talking about World Class because there's been so many World Class wrestling episodes on the network recently, and more people are seeing it, getting into it and everything. And I thought they would be interested in seeing what it was like to spend a couple weeks on the road with World Class Wrestling in the mid-'80s, specifically 1985, when I actually did that in person. And you know, part of the thing is I don't know that people understand the difference between World Class Wrestling, which was really the television show that people saw that was nationally syndicated in the 80s, and the actual Dallas office, which ran wrestling there at Sportatorium in Dallas through several permutations for decades and decades. And it was a territory where you could be in Texas Stadium literally one night and be in a goddamn, 10 building in South Texas 2 weeks later or whatever. So I thought it might be interesting to go back through some of that and kind of clue people in on the deal.
Okay. What week are you looking, or what 2
Well,
weeks?
since I was not, before we did the whatever week it was, right, that we were doing the podcast, but I wasn't in World Class in August and September, so I'm just abandoning that premise of the bit that we and going forward we can just pick any fucking week we want to. But the thing about the Dallas territory and the Dallas booking office were two different things. For folks who might want a primer, as they say, in Texas wrestling, or you can get the fine editions of Back to the Territories with myself and Bruce Pritchard on Houston from Kayfabe Commentaries. But the Dallas booking office was the main wrestling booking office for talent in the state. But Texas for years was several different territories. For example, San Antonio and points south like Laredo, Harlingen, Brownsville, Corpus Christi, and that area of Texas was promoted by Joe Blanchard, Southwest Championship Wrestling. And while they would get talent from the Dallas booking office through a lot of their existence, they would bring in more Hispanic stars. They would also, obviously Tully was, got involved in the business early in his father's promotion, but they would get talent from Dallas. And the Guerreros for years ran El Paso, but while they would obviously use members of their own family and also some of the guys from across the border, they would get talent from the Dallas office, because the big Channel 11 in Fort Worth was a superstation in Dallas or in Texas, and it was seen all over the state, even though it was 700 miles from El Paso. So those guys seen on Channel 11 in Fort Worth from the Dallas office, they were known pretty much everywhere in the state. And then the Dallas office had their own territory, which was Dallas and Fort Worth and all the Metroplex area spot shows in Middle Texas there. And then, of course, the Funks were in West Texas out of Amarillo, and they had their own crew, but a lot of times they'd trade guys back and forth with Dallas. And then there was Houston, because Houston – Paul Bosch ran, and that was a standalone town. It was Paul Bosch's town. Once again, he got talent from Dallas until the 80s when people started changing allegiances. But he would also fly in guys like Nick Bockwinkel from the AWA, and he would fly in favorites or big names from around the country. And Houston was kind of like the crown jewel of the Texas territory, because if you made Houston, you could make as much money as you could maybe in Dallas or in San Antonio or whatever the rest of the week combined. And so that was what made your week. And a lot of people forget also that in the late 60s and early 70s, when the Dallas office was really strong all over the state, the guys were working, they had a lot of top talent. Fritz had drawn 25,000 people to Texas Stadium with a NWA title match with Kaniski, and I think he did it again with Dory Jr. But by the late 70s, with Fritz kind of fading off a little bit, ready to, probably hang it up, the boys had just started, but they weren't hot yet. The Freebirds hadn't come in and popped it. So in the late 70s, Dallas on Friday nights at Sportatorium, I've got one of Fritz's booking books that actually has the figures, might do $5 or $6 or $7 grand. But Houston with an NWA title match, it might do goddamn 30 or 40. So everybody wanted to be in Houston. But the Dallas Metroplex area was kind of a, fair money territory. They didn't have a lot of guys on the roster, and they didn't have a lot of huge names there at late 70s, early 80s period. Then the Freebirds and Von Erichs popped it, and they started doing mega business. So the hot period was 82, 83, 84. And, of course, with perfect timing, we got there in January of 1985. And the territory was it was better than what it had been at some points, but obviously it wasn't as hot as it had been, and it was headed in the wrong direction. And for comparison, we've talked about the Freebirds had no problem whatsoever making over $100,000 their hot year, maybe a couple of hot years in Dallas. And that would be the equivalent of somewhere around $250,000 a piece today, and they were in a three-man tag team. So they paid the Von Erichs, and they paid the guys that worked the programs with the Von Erichs because they figured that's what was drawing the money. And so at the time that we got there, obviously Gino Hernandez, Chris Adams, a one-man gang, and Gary Hart had the Von Erich spots pretty much sewed up, and they were the top heels. And we were brought in to work with the Fantasticks, who had already had come there from Mid-South when they left after our program there. And then we were following them in, and we were going to work a program with them. And the theory was that Watts also wanted us there because they had a trade agreement with Fritz's office, and that way Watts could get us back for big shows in Oklahoma City and Tulsa or the Superdome or, whatever. And that was the carrot, because we knew we were going to a smaller money territory, but we would be – the thing that was selling it for us was we'd be available to come back and work Mid-South shows, which we did quite a bit in January and February. And one day in Oak City and Tulsa, we made as much as we made in the Dallas territory the rest of the week that day. But then that deal they had started cooling off, and all of a sudden Watts ran the Superdome, and we were in Corsicana, Texas at the Rodeo Barn. So that was not the start, but it was some of our grumblings. We had been supposed to go to Charlotte from Mid-South. Flair and Dusty both wanted us, and Jimmy Crockett I'd talked to him, and he'd booked us personally to start with. And we had to call him back and tell him, no, we can't come, because we found out that they were booking us to Dallas because Watts wanted to still have access to us. And for loyalty to the Cowboy, we did that and gave notice, which caused heat between Jimmy Crockett and Bill Watts. I was like, oh, fuck. I've started a promotional war here, my third year in the business.
What did he say to you when you told Crockett that
his exact words were, that's not the first time Watts has fucked me. Oh, God, no, please. I don't want to be involved in this.
It is a little crazy. I'm sorry to interrupt, Jimmy. It is a little crazy to think of the dynamic, though, of Watts is partners in Houston, even though Bosch and that office have no relationship with Fritz at that time. But then Watts is a partner with Fritz in various towns in Oklahoma.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, while we were there, the record of we set the records in Tulsa and Oak City with the last Stampede matches with Watts and JYD. And then the only time that anyone broke any of the records we set in any of those towns that same year with the last Stampede matches was when Kerry faced Flair for the NWA title in that July or whenever the fuck it was, or August in Oak City and Tulsa. They sold out and drew record crowds at bigger ticket prices. So, the Von Erich, they really they could have done themselves a lot more good by working together, because the Von Erichs were strong off that TV, but also at the same time, and I hope Kevin didn't listen to this because I don't want to give him a false impression, but sometimes you could not depend at that point in time on Kerry. I remember also he was in Oak City one time when he was in a tag match, and Bill Dundee walks in the locker room and says, "Kerry, what do you want to do for a finish?" And Kerry says, sunset flip. Okay. And then Dundee goes around and talks to a couple of other people. And as he's leaving the locker room, Kerry says, "Bill, what was that finish you wanted again?" So it was, anyway, point being, that's where the money was in Dallas, was working with the Von Erichs or being the Von Erichs. And so we started out with the Fantasticks, and we thought, well, at least we love working with these guys. But we thought that eventually we would be moved up into a position to do something with the Von Erichs, because here the Midnight Express has just set records in every major town in the territory to their immediate right as a top heel team. So we thought we was going to work with the Von Erichs. And by the time that the point in time in question, May, that we're going to talk about today, was rolling around, we still hadn't touched the fucking Von Erichs. And we had turned it. Then we saw that Crockett got the TBS time slot. So I'm sitting there in Dallas looking at this week that I'm going to start in. I made $975, which now, once again, today, that's it. The calculation we came up with last time was about 2.5 times. So it was probably about $2,300 for the week. And it wasn't really a terrible week. There was a couple long trips, but we flew Southwest. The main attraction of this territory was after we had worked Mid-South Wrestling and traveled 3,000 and 4,000 miles a week in a car while working 7 nights a week and literally twice on Sunday. We almost always got a night off, at least, or 2 nights off every week in Dallas. And a lot of the trips were very short. They ran Dallas-Fort Worth twice a week. So that was a positive, and the money wasn't rotten. But I'm sitting there watching TV, and I'm watching the TBS show with all the Crockett guys go, oh, my God. And I could tell they had great talent, but I could also tell that the Midnight Express could hang with everybody they had in the ring, and that I could hang with everybody they had on television with a promo. And, my God, we should be sitting there on national TV, but instead tonight we're going to Elmore City, Oklahoma. So there was an element of that. And then when the Texas Stadium match that we're going to discuss here in a minute, and the check we got from that and a couple other things, this was a pivotal week or 2-week period. And it is April 26, 1985 through, hold on here. Actually, I'm cheating a little bit, 2 weeks and 2 days, Sunday, May 12th, 1985. So that's kind of the gist. This is where the territories were. This is what was going on with us. I've set the stage. All things as they were then, except you are there. Did you ever watch that show when you were a kid?
Well, I don't know what show you're referring to.
You Are There.
No, I never watched it.
It was a CBS News children's program that ran for years and years. And they would take you back and they would reenact a point in history. And the opening narration by, I believe it was Walter Cronkite, but is all things are as they were then, except you are there.
Oh, no.
I can see you're fucking highly impressed.
No, I thought you were going to say that was the one where kids watch Charles Corral hit on their mothers, but I guess not.
All right. Anyway, so April 26th, we're in Dallas, the world famous Sportatorium, right? Which is basically 20 miles from my apartment in Irving. So Friday, we don't have to leave the house till 5:30. This is unheard of in Mid-South Wrestling. To get there at 6:30 for a show at 7:30. So in Dallas at the Sportatorium, earlier in the year, the houses had been ranging about 20 to 30 grand. Several Fridays in a row, we were sold out. And our payoffs between $300 and $400. That was one of the bigger ones of the week in that territory. And it was great. It was a great atmosphere, right? But things are cooling off a little bit at this point because we're all doing the same shit. Everybody is working with the same people they were working with in January. Our match that night, it was the Midnight Express and Rip Oliver against Fantasticks and Kevin Von Erich. Kevin was in there again because Rip had slammed the door on Mike's hand or whatever when Mike broke it accidentally in a match. And basically, Bobby Fulton beat a sunset flip. As a matter of fact, beat the heels in a 6-man, boom. The booking, in my opinion, was very suspect with the amount of television and the interest they had there. Ken Mantell couldn't figure shit out any better than this. It drove me crazy. But anyway, it made $275. Again, That was pretty much the payoff of the week. The next day, we are in Harlingen, Texas. This was when they gave up running the South Texas towns shortly after this, but you could either drive 525 miles each way to the Mexican border, or you could fly Southwest, and it would cost you $123 for a ticket, right? So what we did was, and then we were San Antonio the next day. So what we did was we went ahead and got our plane ticket to go to Harlingen on Southwest and fly back from San Antonio, and rented a car in the middle, right? And between the plane ticket and the motel and the food that we spent on the road, and a motel again in San Antonio, by the way, before we could fly back the next day, altogether, 27, we had about $350 in doing what we did. And in Harlingen, our payoff against the Fantastic in a tag team match against the Fantasticks was $115 because there was almost nobody there. And in San Antonio, they had pretty much successfully run a lot of people off of that town, because that house was $13,000, and our payoff against the Fantasticks in a tag team title match was $100. So we went in a hole $130 for the weekend.
Hey, let me ask you this, Jim, because I know this question came in several times from people after the last time you did the week in Mid-South. When you say our payoff was $100, are you referring to each guy got $100, or it was split?
No, yes, each guy. Jesus Christ, no, not like the three of us. But I'm saying we each made the same. That's another thing they tried to do to me. We had a deal because we were a 3-man team in Mid-South. Watts paid each of the three of us the same. But in Dallas, when we started, they tried to pay me less because they paid their managers less than they paid their wrestlers. And we had to go in and explain, no. And I appreciate Bobby and Dennis standing up for me on that. But they tried to get away with that too. Anyway, the following Monday morning, the 29th, we get up to San Antonio. We fly back. And we're in Fort Worth that night, so at least we can go home for the day, because Fort Worth is 30 miles the other direction. And every Monday night we're in Fort Worth because we do the TV show for Saturday nights, KTVT, Channel 11. It was a 2-hour program. It was the most boring wrestling program I've ever seen in my life, except for the interviews. Because, in the Will Rogers Coliseum, which the house was pretty much the same thing, or maybe a little better once in a while every week, this house was $15,300, and we made $125. It was a dreary atmosphere. They had these long matches. The tag teams had long single matches. They had 2 out of 3 fall matches, non-program matches, just wrestling matches to fill the time, with Mark Lorenz doing the commentary, who was a religious mortician, I believe is what Mark. He was he was like a mannequin. Just no fire, no oomph. If somebody had cut somebody's head off with a chainsaw in front of him, he would have gone, well, that's a terrible infraction of the rules. And anyway, so we would do this every Monday at the Will Rogers Coliseum. This night was Dennis Condrey against Scott Casey for the TV title. That's where he stole my green jacket, which was not even planned, but people, for whatever reason in Texas, still remember this. It basically is Casey catches Dennis, but then Rip Oliver runs in, and we start to get some heat on him, and he grabs me and gives me an atomic drop. And when I take the bump out, he's got my green suit jacket, and he just keeps it. And I pitch a fit about it on the next interview, and people thought it was an angle, because that's how many angles they got. None in those days on TV that they loved the green jacket angle. And then I mentioned that my mother had given it to me for coming in 432nd at the Masters or whatever. Then also that night I managed Rip Oliver against Brian Adias. 2 out of 3 falls for Rip to go over. Brian Adias, good friend of the Von Erichs. And that was probably about a 30-minute match. It was brutal. Anyway.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. But the interviews, you could do whatever you wanted to do, because the first time I went out there, I said, well, how long is the interview segment? They said, they're open-ended. It's a 2-hour show. Just don't let it drag. And I got that smile. And this is where I met Keith Mitchell, who's the producer today in Global Force Wrestling, because he was working with the World Class crew down there. And finally, after about 2 weeks, they had a bet that I couldn't keep it under 7 minutes. Because I was talking about the matches in Fort Worth on Monday and then Dallas on Friday and whatever big main event was coming up. And I was talking about the Midnight Express and also Rip Oliver at that point. So there was a lot of things going on. Anyway, the next day, Tuesday, we've just been in Fort Worth, right? Guess where we are on Tuesday night? Dallas. At a spot show at a high school in a town they ran every week anyway. We did $8,000. We made $175 and worked with the deal was on every spot show, there'd be a tag match with the Midnight and the Fantasticks. And then there'd be a captain's match. That's another thing we didn't like. The second match of the night would be either Bobby Eaton against Bobby Fulton or Dennis Condrey against Tommy Rogers or some captain's match of the tag match. So we'd have to go out there and be seen for 20 or 25 minutes because they only had 4 matches on their spot shows. And then we'd go out for a tag team match after they'd already said and plus it was double the fucking work for 2 guys. And you got paid like $15 extra if you were in the captain's match. I swear to God, I'm not kidding. So they would have literally 8 to counting the referees, 10 or 11 guys on a roster on a spot show. And they made $8,000 at a high school in Dallas. And in this case, $175 for working the tag team main event plus a singles match underneath. So, yeah. Brutal. The next day, we're in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is only 200 miles from Dallas. Still, that's nothing compared to a Mid-South trip, right? The house is $13,000. This time, we're against the Fantasticks, where, once again, they go over. Plus, I managed Rip Oliver against Kabuki. And Dennis Condrey was in a captain's match against Tommy Rogers. The house was $13,000. I made $285. They were a little more generous with Lawton, as you'll notice. I did the same in Fort Worth. The house was $15,300, and I made $125. At any rate, Thursday, May 2nd, Fort Hood, Texas. Another 200-mile trip, so 400 each way. I managed 3 matches: Fantasticks, Midnight Express, then Bobby Eaton and Tommy Rogers, and then Rip Oliver and Mike Von Erich, which was a rip snorter, and made $140. Then on Friday, you always went to Channel 39 for do local interviews, right? So all the top heels and baby faces. So it was Gino, Chris, Gary, Gang, myself, the Von Erichs, Fantasticks. Then to Mount Pleasant, Texas, 130 miles away, 260-mile round trip. $8,500 house, we made $185 at some high school gym somewhere. Saturday, May 4th, we were off, and then Saturday, May 5th, 1985, after headlining in beautiful Fort Hood and Mount Pleasant, Texas, and spending some time in Lawton, Oklahoma, we're in Texas Stadium, the home of the Cowboys, Texas Stadium for the Von Erich second annual Von Erich Memorial event. $256,000 house. We are in the American Tag Team Championship match with the Fantastics. The belts have been held up for 2 months. Nobody's been champion. This is Ken Mantell's booking for you. And in this match, it's the Midnight Express versus the Fantastics because they've got a 12-man tag match in the main event, and it happens in 2 rings. They also determined that our match is going to happen in 2 rings. It's no time limit, no disqualification, anything goes. All 4 guys in all 2 rings at the same time with 2 referees. They didn't gimmick this up much, did they? And I'm sitting next to neutralize me, Little John Harris, the legendary Little John, Silo Sam, whatever the fuck you want to call that 7'6" pile of fucking dog shit. Whatever his name was or is, or however you had the misfortune to come across anything that he's ever done on video or whatever, if you saw this thing in person. But this dumb fuck they'd found in South Texas, we'd told the story before, he's like 7'6" and 450 pounds, a big fucking stomach and no athletic ability and dumber than a box of rocks, stupider than owl shit slapped with a board, as my Aunt Lola used to say. And he was sitting next to me, and at some point in this fucked up, over-gimmicked, convoluted match, he's supposed to stand up and slap Bobby's leg, which is going to distract him, and they do a double pin, but the Fantastics come up with the count first, and they win the belts. Well, this dumb fuck, even with me trying to, with elbowing him, actually hitting him, gigging him, go, now, do it now. He stands there like a fucking stick until finally he did it late, and basically the double pin ended up with the Midnight Express winning the belts right in front of everybody, and then the referees giving the Fantasticks the belts. And then, because they wanted the big spot with the Giant, my pre-gimmicked tennis racket was gimmicked so he could break it, because he was so weak and he couldn't draw a greasy string out of a cat's ass, much less break a tennis racket in his bare hands. They gimmicked it, but they insisted I hit him with it first and he no-sell it, and then him break it. And when I hit him with it, it just toppled over. The whole head came off the racket. Just a fart. And you can see me going down the aisle how fucking hot I was, right? So instead of going out and stealing a show in front of 25,000 people in Texas Stadium, the match was good for what it was, but the finish just sucked, and it didn't get across what we were trying to do. And then we get the payoff on a $250,000 house where we're in the tag team title match. Guess what we got paid?
$400 each.
Well, $1,150.
Okay, well, there you go.
Which, no, there you go. That's when we started saying, what the fuck are we doing here? And that's when
You also managed the second time on that show, because the 10-man tag, 10-man, 2 teams you managed, Rip Oliver. And Rip Oliver was against Mike Von Erich in a single match also, and beat him too. So yeah, we got all the heels got the shit kicked out of us. I got $1,150, but the point is that fucking sucked. And we didn't get the check till the following week, and then wheels were in motion. In 6 weeks, we'd be in Charlotte. But anyway, on Monday, the day after the Texas Stadium show in Irving, Texas, 15 miles from Dallas, guess where we are? We're back in Fort Worth. This time, not even at Will Rogers Coliseum, at the Exhibition Hall. Rip Oliver and Johnny Mantell, 3 falls on TV for $120. Then we go to Cayuga, Texas, which is about 90 miles away, against the Fantasticks in a captain's match for $100. We are off on Wednesday, May the 8th. And once again, this is like hour and a half, 2-hour trips, if that, every day, or being in town, Fort Worth and Dallas, and off on Wednesday. We're resting our bodies. We made $810 this next week, right? And so we were resting our bodies, and there was something to be said for that. But that's when we started reestablishing our relationship with Jimmy Crockett. So Thursday, May 9th, we go to Broken Bow, Oklahoma, which is 200 miles away. So a 400-mile round trip. You'd probably leave about 2 in the afternoon. You get back about 2 in the morning. Against the Fantasticks and a captain's match for $225. Then we're back in Dallas at the Sportatorium, where Bobby has a singles match with Sean Casey and get $100. Oof. Which fucking sucked in Dallas. But the next day we're in River Oaks, Texas, 20 miles from my apartment. And Dennis goes, Bobby and Tommy Rogers are at the other spot show. That's another thing. When they ran 2 towns, they'd split the boys up and send 2 of them to each town. It's ludicrous. So I managed Dennis Condrey in a 20-minute Broadway with Bobby Fulton, 20 minutes from the apartment for $115. Okay, all right. Not bad.
However, the reason why I wanted to go to Sunday, May 12th, this was an historic day. Mother's Day, for one thing, but also our first day in St. Louis, Missouri, at the Kiel Auditorium. We were so looking forward to this because we're booked at the Kiel Auditorium in historic St. Louis against the Fantasticks. Off the Dallas TV, we're going to have a great match in the home of the NWA, right? This is going to be a thrill. I got goosebumps thinking about it right now. They're flying us up there. Of course, they sent us a coach ticket, and I see that we upgraded here because with our frequent flyer gimmick. But anyway, so we go up there, and unfortunately, what I had neglected to consider in my excitement over going to St. Louis was that Sam Muchnick had now been retired for 3.5 years. We get there, and the house in the Kiel Auditorium is $15,000. And that translates not even 1,500 people, I don't think, at that point in time. And we had the match, but it was the Kiel Auditorium, for heaven's sake. So that was a thrill. But the St. Louis and Kansas City, the Central States office had asked for us up there off the Dallas TV. So that was not for World Class. That was a Central States booking. So our check came separately and came about a week and a half later. And when we got it, That wasn't the first time our mouths had dropped open when we saw how few people were in the Kiel Auditorium, and then our mouths dropped open when we saw how few numbers were on the check from Heart of America Sports Promotions. $150.
No.
$150. We flew from Dallas to St. Louis. We spent $46 on a motel, right? We ate, which cost twice at fucking Wendy's. That's what we were all doing in those days, $20. And we upgraded to first class, $60 each way, because we were hot shit making our St. Louis debuts, right? So we went in the goddamn hole for that one. And that's why the next time they asked for us, we had already given our notice in Dallas, right? And we were already leaving to go to Charlotte, and they had booked us to go back to St. Louis and to Kansas City. And we said, no, we're only going to do it if we get a guarantee. We got to have $200 a guy or whatever it was, right, for the 2 shots. And that's when we got there and found out that we were in a tag team tournament. And we worked 4 times that night for the $200 guarantee. But I digress. Anyway, so that was our debut in St. Louis. And then just so you know, actually the next week is interesting. We come back on Monday and, of course, go back to Fort Worth for the weekly Boar Fest, where we worked with Scott Casey and the great Kabuki, where I tried to steal my jacket, but he got it, Sunshine got it back for $125. Then we worked on Tuesday in Atlanta, Texas. But listen to this one, 180 miles away from Dallas, in Atlanta, Texas, at a local high school gym. They do a $15,000 house. And because there was only 8 of us on the card and we did the old captain's match deal, we got $325 a piece. So in Atlanta, Texas, on a $15,000 house at a spot show, we got better than 25% of our payoff on a $250,000 house at Texas Stadium. We were off on Wednesday, May 15th. We went to Prosper, Texas on Thursday, May 16th. It was a 100-mile round trip from Dallas for $115. We were back in Dallas on Friday night doing it because Dallas at the Sportatorium every 2 weeks was a house show. But every 2 weeks was the world-class syndicated show that everybody has seen, that the great close-up camera work and the hot crowd. Well, we were on an underneath match beating Mike Bond and Skip Young. You got $115, and that's all we did that night. And we get up the next day, and this was a very, very special day, Saturday, May 18th, the first day that I met in person Sam Mineker.
Oh, wow. Get out of here.
We go Fort Bliss, Texas, for an afternoon show at 2:00, which is right next to El Paso, and it's a little armory. And Sam Mineker came in to say hello to everybody. We did $10,000 there at the armory because he was living out there. We did $10,000 there at the little afternoon show and got $200 for that, and then went to El Paso, the Civic Center that night, where we had $22,000. And did $275 in our match with the Fantasticks. I was handcuffed to Kerry Von Erich. We almost had a riot that night, as I recall, getting to the ring. And that's why when I was handcuffed to Kerry Von Erich, I was actually the happiest fucker in the place because I figured they wouldn't shoot at me just in case they might hit him. So that day was actually somewhat profitable and eventful. And then the next day we went back to Dallas and we were off. But that was the thing with world-class wrestling. And really, when they ran more spot shows up around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, even though they were dinky towns, it was better than when they were running South Texas. There was a $100 minimum in South Texas, but it was 500 miles each way, and that's all you were going to get was $100 because the towns weren't drawing. So it would cost you more, as I just illustrated, to fly and be able to actually get there and back than you made. So it was, but at the same time, you could be in Texas Stadium in front of 25,000 people, then of course not get paid properly, or you could go to a high school gym 90 miles from your house and make the equivalent of what would be $900 or $1,000 today. So it just, there was no rhyme or reason, but that's when we saw all of those things going on. That's when we and when the talent deal went south, as I mentioned, as you notice, we were not in any Mid-South towns during that period that I mentioned. But for example, earlier in the year, we had already been brought back to New Orleans. We'd already been brought back to Oak City and Tulsa, whereas I mentioned, we made more than we made in the Dallas territory the rest of the goddamn time. Watts brought us back for one just 4-day period in February, where we made 3 days. We made $770 in 3 days, but in Dallas, the week or the day before we left, we made $80, and when we got back, we made $150. So we were making better payoffs in the territory that we were being booked out to than the one we were supposedly working in. It was brutal.
Man. Let me ask you this, Jim, because obviously you didn't have a great experience in Dallas and you didn't get rich in Dallas, and Ken Mantell was the booker, and you never got to work with the Von Erichs, sadly, because I'm pretty sure Kevin and Kerry would have loved having Bobby Eaton fly around the ring for them. But all things being equal, everything considered, in any way do you hi, Harley Quinn, in any way do you think that it ended up being to your benefit that you didn't start in January of '85 before the rock and roll even got there, and that you started when you did?
Well, yes, for several reasons. One, everybody had rested their bodies, with that schedule where we were only working 5 days a week sometimes. And the shorter trips, we got more rest and mentally. And also I got some more promo practice because doing the really brief or tightly controlled ones in Mid-South for a television show that really was controlled on all levels was great. But being able to go out and just having the time and not giving a shit to extrapolate on the Fort Worth TV, and getting a lot of that practice in where, I was scorching everybody, that was really helpful to do in TBS TV later on. So, it really was.
I was thinking, I guess Mark Lawrence in many ways was like your batting tee before you got to the major leagues of David Crockett and Tony Schiavone to hit.
And then also because World Class wasn't actually syndicated, we got on TV and we were seen because the people that saw us on TBS in Atlanta, we would have come from nowhere if we'd have just come directly from Mid-South. Because while Mid-South wrestling was huge for the TV markets who did not get Mid-South wrestling, they didn't know what the fuck was going on there, so they wouldn't have known us. But because we had been in World Class already, and at least we'd been working with the Fantasticks for 6 months every night. So at least we were having great matches. We were just not getting anywhere with it. So they had seen us have a bunch of great matches on TV. So that helped. And then when we showed up on TBS, they already kind of thought we were somebody. So yes, it was a help. It just, holy mackerel. It could have been a little bit better all the way around. They just moved the booking moved so slowly. It involved so few people. And you saw the same people. It was a weekly territory like Memphis, but it moved so much more slowly than Memphis. I think that's what the problem was.
Other than Vince, did every small office that all of a sudden hit gold stay small?
Yeah. That's another thing. When they were, all of a sudden, not only are they running Texas Stadium, but they're the biggest television program in Israel, and they're starting to run that Manning Bowl in the suburb of Boston that did, 8 or 10,000 people at time. But they're still running out of the goddamn, sportatorium where when Ken Mantell and Bronco Lubitsch come in the morning, they flip the lights on. They got 22 pistols to see if they can pick off some of the rats when they're running back out of the light. They were still a little bitty company, almost. Until everybody started chasing Vince, when, Crockett got an office in Dallas, and when Watts moved his office over to Dallas.
Dallas is the death of everybody.
Everybody always stayed where they were because they were smart enough. No, it's been great before, but it'll also be, bad again. So, yeah. Except Nick Goulas, the story goes, when he built a couple of years before he finally, I think he was doing it just to show people that he was still all right after Jarrett split off with him. Like, this was 2 years before he ended up selling everything to Jerry. They say he built a new office building in Nashville, And the story I got was that he paid $180,000 in cash for it. Not in cash like, I'll write you a check, you can go cash it. In cash like, here's what I had in the office safe.
Wow.
Because as we mentioned, even back in those days, the spot shows were cash cows. But anyway, and also some of the big shows were cash cows too. If they drew $250,000, just gave me and the Midnight Express a little over $3,300 of it. By God. Yeah, that's when we got back on the phone with Jimmy Crockett and Dusty, and like, well, is there still an opening? We feel that we have fulfilled our personal obligation to the cowboy by serving our penance here, especially since he's no longer being allowed to book us now out into his territory. So instead, we're going to Kansas City, where Bob Geigel is treating us to fucking bankruptcy on a goddamn budget. So that's when we opened those lines of communication up and we started at the end of June.
Bobby Eaton was always so quiet on camera, obviously, but when you guys get these checks and you're commiserating amongst yourselves, I would picture Dennis being vocal. Did Bobby speak up? Did Bobby usually have something to say?
Generally a lot of nodding and agreeing, and I did not write corny. You know, but I mean, he wasn't actively going to whip him by his ass over it, but he certainly wasn't turning any cartwheels either. I'd seen him happy when he got checks, and I don't think I ever saw him really happy. A couple of times astonished, even when we got some of our first Last Stampede checks, but I never saw him either happy or astonished at any of the checks we got in Dallas. So, but yeah, Dennis, especially the first time that he did a captain's match. And they actually paid him because the guy that did the captain's match was supposed to get something extra, right? And the minimum was $50 on any show. They weren't going to pay you less than $50 on any show anywhere. One night with the spot show, it was the shits. He did the captain's match. He got his check $63. And he was indignant. It was just like they just figured it right down to the nub. They gave him just as much as they could. Not even 62, but $63. It was just like, he said if they need the fucking $13 so goddamn bad, they should have kept it. So that was not a it was not a lucrative part, but it did serve its purpose. Yes.
All right.
But you get a $63 payoff for working twice in Dallas in 1985. Now we know that. Oh my God. Well, anyway, but that's what it was like. So for people who have wondered, and both of you out there who have wondered what it would be like traveling on the road in world-class wrestling back in the day, that's it. It was feast or famine, good and bad, fun and not fun, close and far. It was contradictions, Brian. A paradoxical situation.
You either worked with the Von Erichs or you didn't.
You either worked with the Von Erichs or by God you didn't. I think we touched them about 4 times actually. I had two tag matches with Mike on the other side, that one I mentioned with Kevin, and something else I think where we passed in the night. Anyway,